Hello, Lady Chatterley's Lover. Yes, the continuing story of Lady Chatterley's Lover with me, Morel Bernard. I think my last words were goodness. The knowledge went through Mrs. Bolton like a shot. He was Lady Chatterley's lover. He. To think of it. Why, she, Ivy Bolton, had once been a tiny bit in love with him herself, when he had been a lad of 16 and she was a woman of 26. It was when she was studying and he had helped her a lot with the anatomy and things she had had to learn. He'd been a clever boy, had a scholarship for Sheffield Grammar School and learned French and things, and then, after all, had become an overhead blacksmith shoeing horses because he was fond of horses, he said, but really because he was frightened to go out and face the world. Only he never admitted it. But he'd been a nice lad, had helped her a lot. So clever at making things clear to you. He was quite as clever as Sir Clifford, and always one for the women, more with women than men, they said. Till he had gone and married Bertha Coots, as if to spite himself. Some people do marry to spite themselves because they're disappointed of something, and no wonder it had been a failure. For years he was gone, all the time of the war, and a lieutenant and all. Quite the gentleman, really quite the gentleman. Then come back to Tevershall and go as a gamekeeper, really. Some people can't take their chances when they've got them. And talking broad Derbyshire again like the worst, when she, Ivy Bolton, knew he spoke like any gentleman. Really. Well. So her ladyship had fallen for him. Well, her ladyship wasn't the first. There was something about him. But fancy that. A Tevershall lad born and bred, and she her ladyship in Rugby Hall. My word, what a slap back of the high and mighty Chatterleys. But he, the keeper, as the day grew, had realised it's no good. It's no good trying to get rid of your own aloneness. You've got to stick to it all your life. Only at times the gap will be filled. At times. But you have to wait for the times. Accept your own aloneness and stick to it all your life. And then accept the times when the gap is filled in when they come. But they've got to come. You can't force them. With a sudden snap, the bleeding desire that had drawn him after her broke. He had broken it, because it must be so. There must be a coming together on both sides, and if she wasn't coming to him, he wouldn't track her down. He mustn't. He must go away till she came. He turned slowly, ponderingly, accepting again the isolation. He knew it was better so. She must come to him. It was no use his trailing after her, no use. Mrs. Bolton saw him disappear, saw his dog run after him. Well, she said, he is the one man I never thought of, and the one man I might have thought of. He was nice to me when he was a lad, after I lost Ted. Well, whatever would he say if he knew? And she glanced triumphantly at the already sleeping Clifford as she stepped softly from the room. Connie was sorting out one of the Rugby lumber rooms. There were several. The house was a warren, and the family never sold anything. Sir Geoffrey's father had liked pictures, and Sir Geoffrey's mother had liked sequential furniture. Sir Geoffrey himself had liked old carved oak chests, vestry chest. So it went on through the generations. Clifford collected very modern pictures at very moderate prices. So in the lumber room there were bad Sir Edwin Landseers and pathetic William Henry Hunt's Bird's Nest and other Academy stuff enough to frighten the daughter of an RA. She determined to look through it one day and clear it all, and the grotesque furniture interested her. Wrapped up carefully to preserve it from damage and dry rot was the only old family cradle of rosewood. She had to unwrap it to look at it. It had a certain charm. She looked at it a long time. "It's thousand pities it won't be called for," sighed Mrs. Bolton, who was helping. "Though cradles like that are out of date nowadays." "It might be called for. I might have a child," said Connie casually, as if saying she might have a new hat. "You mean if anything happened to Sir Clifford?" stammered Mrs. Bolton. "No, I mean as things are. It's only muscular paralysis with Sir Clifford. It doesn't affect him," said Connie, lying as naturally as breathing. Clifford had put the idea into her head. He had said, "Of course, I may have a child yet. I'm not really mutilated at all. The potency may easily come back even if the muscles of the hips and legs are paralyzed, and then the seed may be transferred." He really felt, when he had his periods of energy and worked so hard at the questions of the minds, as if his sexual potency were returning. Connie had looked at him in terror, but she was quite quick-witted enough to use his suggestion for her own preservation, for she would have a child if she could, but not his. Mrs. Bolton was for a moment breathless, flabbergasted. Then she didn't believe it. She saw it in a ruse. Yet doctors could do such things nowadays. They might sort of graft seed. "Well, my lady, I only hope and pray you may. It would be lovely for you and for everybody. My word, a child in Rugby, what a difference it would make. Wouldn't it?" said Connie. And she chose 3 RA pictures of 60 years ago to send to the Duchess of Shortlands for the ladies' next charitable bazaar. She was called the Bazaar Duchess, and she always asked all the county to send things for her to sell. She would be delighted with 3 frame RAs. She might even call on the strength of them. How furious Clifford was when she called. But, oh my dear, Mrs. Bolton was thinking to herself, is it Oliver Mellor's child you're preparing us for? Oh my dear. Oh, that would be a Tevish baby in the Rugby cradle, my word. Wouldn't shame it neither. Among other monstrosities in this lumber room was a largish black japanned box, excellently and ingeniously made some 60 or 70 years ago and fitted with every imaginable object. On top was a concentrated toilet set, brushes, bottles, mirrors, combs, boxes, even 3 beautiful little razors and safety sheets, shaving bowl and all. Underneath came a sort of escritoire outfit, blotters, pens, ink bottles, paper, envelopes, memorandum books, and then a perfect sewing outfit with 3 different size scissors, thimbles, needles, silks and cottons, darning egg, all of the very best quality and perfectly finished. Then there was a little medicine store with bottles labelled laudanum, tincture of myrrh, S, cloves and so on, but empty. Everything was perfectly new, and the whole thing, when shut up, was as big as a small but fat weekend bag, and inside it fitted together like a puzzle. The bottles could not possibly have spilled. There wasn't room. The thing was wonderfully made and contrived, excellent craftsmanship of the Victorian order. But somehow it was monstrous. Some Chatterley must even have felt it, for the thing had never been used. It had a peculiar soullessness. Yet Mrs. Bolton was thrilled. Look, what beautiful brushes! So expensive. Even the shaving brushes. 3 perfect ones. No, and those scissors. They're the best that money could buy. Oh, I call it lovely. Do you? Said Connie. Then you have it. Oh, no, no, my lady. Of course. It will only lie here till doomsday. If you won't have it, I'll send it to the Duchess as well as the pictures, and she doesn't deserve so much. Do have it. Oh, your ladyship. Why, I shall never be able to thank you. You needn't try, laughed Connie. And Mrs. Bolton sailed down with a huge and very black box in her arms, flushing bright pink in her excitement. Mr. Betts drove her in the trap to her house in the village with the box, and she had to have a few friends in to show it. The schoolmistress, the chemist's wife, Mrs. Weedon, the under-cashier's wife. They thought it marvellous, and then started the whisper of Lady Chatterley's child. Wonders never cease, said Mrs. Weedon. But Mrs. Bolton was convinced if it did come, it would be Sir Clifford's child. So there. Not long afterwards, the rector said gently to Clifford, and may we really hope for an heir to Rugby? Ah, that would be the hand of God in mercy indeed. Well, we may hope, said Clifford with a faint irony, and at the same time a certain conviction. He had begun to believe it really possible it might even be his child. Then one afternoon came Leslie Winter, Squire Winter, as everybody called him, lean, immaculate, and 70, and every inch a gentleman, as Mrs. Bolton said to Mrs. Betts. Every millimetre indeed. And with his old-fashioned, rather haw-haw manner of speaking, he seemed more out of date than Bagwigs. Time in her flight drops these fine old feathers. They discussed the colliers. Clifford's idea was that his coal, even the poor sort, could be made into hard, concentrated fuel that would burn at great heat if fed with certain damp, acidulated air at a fairly strong pressure. It had long been observed that in a particularly strong wet wind the pit bank burned very vivid, gave off hardly any fumes, and left a fine powder of ash instead of the slow pink gravel. But where will you find the proper engines for burning your fuel? Asked Winter. I'll make them myself, and I'll use my fuel myself, and I'll sell electric power. I'm certain I could do it. If you can do it, then splendid, splendid, my dear boy. Ah, splendid. If I can be of any help, I shall be delighted. I'm afraid I'm a little out of date, and my colliers are like me. But who knows? When I'm gone, there may be men like you. Splendid, splendid. It will employ all the men again, and you won't have to sell your coal or fail to sell it. A splendid idea, and I hope it will be a success. If I had sons of my own, no doubt they would have up-to-date ideas for Shipley, no doubt. By the way, dear boy, is there any foundation to the rumour that we may entertain hopes of an heir to Rugby? Is there a rumour? asked Clifford. Well, my dear boy, Marshall from Flingingwood, he asked me. That's all I can say about a rumour. Of course, I wouldn't repeat it for the world if there were no foundation. Well, sir, said Clifford uneasily, but with strange bright eyes. There is a hope. There is a hope. Winter came across the room and wrung Clifford's hand. My dear boy, my dear lad, can you believe what it means to me to hear that? And to hear you are working in the hopes of a son, and that you may again employ every man at Tevershaw? Ah, my boy, to keep up the level of the race and to have work waiting for any man who cares to work? The old man was really moved. Next day, Connie was arranging tall yellow tulips in a glass vase. Connie, said Clifford, did you know there was a rumour that you are going to supply Rugby with a son and heir? Connie felt dim with terror, yet she stood quite still, touching the flowers. No, she said. Is it a joke or malice? He paused before he answered. Neither, I hope. I hope it may be a prophecy. Connie went on with her flowers. I had a letter from father this morning, she said. He wants to know if I'm aware he has accepted Sir Alexander Cooper's invitation to me for July and August to the Villa Esmeralda in Venice. July and August, said Clifford. Oh, I wouldn't stay all that time. Are you sure you wouldn't come? I won't travel abroad, said Clifford promptly. She took her flowers to the window. Do you mind if I go? She said. You know, it was promised for this summer. For how long would you go? Perhaps 3 weeks. There was silence for a time. Well, said Clifford slowly, and a little gloomily, I suppose I could stand it for 3 weeks if I were absolutely sure you'd want to come back. I should want to come back, she said, with a quiet simplicity, heavy with conviction. She was thinking of the other man. Clifford felt her conviction, and somehow he believed her. He believed it was for him. He felt immensely relieved, joyful at once. In that case, he said, I think it would be all right, don't you? I think so, she said. You'd enjoy the change. She looked up at him with strange blue eyes. I should like to see Venice again, she said, and to bathe from one of the shingle islands across the lagoon. But you know I loathe the Lido, and I don't fancy I shall like Sir Alexander Cooper and Lady Cooper. But if Hilda is there, and we have a gondola for our own, yes, it will be rather lovely. I do wish you'd come. She said it sincerely. She would so love to have him happy in these ways. Ah, but think of me, though, at the Gare du Nord, at Calais Quay. But why not? I see other men carried in litter chairs who have been wounded in the war. Besides, we'd motor all the way. We should need to take 2 men. Oh no, we'd manage with Field. There would always be another man there. But Clifford shook his head. Not this year, dear, not this year. Next year, probably, I'll try. She went away gloomily. Next year. What would next year bring? She herself did not really want to go to Venice, not now. Now there was the other man. But she was going as a sort of discipline, and also because if she had a child, Clifford could think she had a lover in Venice. It was already May, and in June they were supposed to start. Always these arrangements, always one's life arranged for one. Wheels had worked one and drove one, and over which one had no real control. It was May, but cold and wet again. A cold, wet May, good for corn and hay. Much the corn and hay matter nowadays. Connie had to go into Youthwaite, which was their little town, where the Chatterleys were still the Chatterleys. She went alone. Field driving her. In spite of May and the new greenness, the country was dismal. It was rather chilly, and there was smoke on the rain, and a certain sense of exhaust, vapour in the air. One just had to live from one's resistance. No wonder these people were ugly and tough. The car ploughed uphill through the long, squalid straggle of Teviotdale, the blackened brick dwellings, the black slate roof glistening their sharp edges, the mud black with coal dust, the pavements wet and black. It was as if dismalness had soaked through and through everything, the utter negation of natural beauty, the utter negation of the gladness of life, the utter absence of the instinct for shapely beauty which every bird and beast has, the utter death of human intuitive faculty was appalling. The stacks of soap in the grocer's shops, the rhubarb and lemons and the greengrocers, the awful hats in the milliners, all went by ugly, 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 followed by the plaster and gilt horror of the cinema with its wet picture announcements, a woman's love, and the new primitive chapel, primitive enough in its stark brick and big panes of greenish and raspberry glass in the windows. The Wesleyan chapel higher up was of blackened brick and stood behind iron railings and blackened shrubs. The Congregational chapel, which thought itself superior, was built of rusticated sandstone and had a steeple, but not a very high one. Just beyond were the new school buildings, expensive brick and gravel playground inside iron railings, all very imposing and fixing the suggestion of a chapel and a prison. Standard 5 girls were having a singing lesson, just finishing the La Mi Do La exercises and beginning a sweet children's song. Anything more unlike song, spontaneous song, would be impossible to imagine. A strange bawling yell that followed the outlines of a tune. It was not like savages. Savages have subtle rhythms. It was not like animals. Animals mean something when they yell. It was like nothing on earth, and it was singing. Connie sat and listened, with her heart in her boots, as Field was filling petrol. What could possibly become of such a people in whom the living intuitive faculty was dead as nails, and only queer mechanical yells and uncanny willpower remained. You're listening to Lady Chatterley's Lover with me, Morale Bernard. Join me for the next video. Please join me for the next video of Lady Chatterley's Lover. Look forward to the next video.